Welcome to the Accelerated Performance Experiment. Today's guests, Todd Banks, Kevin Moore, and Andrew Corner with Rick Kanary. Our topic today is the value of unlearning.
All right, well, welcome to our program. Our topic today is the value of unlearning. And by unlearning, what we're suggesting is something that relates to an Alvin Toffler quote, which I'm going to share with you right now. The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And to relate that directly to a J.K. brand quote, J.K. shares the concept that it's not what you don't know that will hurt you. It's what you know that ain't so that will hurt you. And in the Born Rich program, J.K. discusses a moment when Bruce Lee is approached by a student, and Bruce turns him away, refuses to teach him, and suggests that his cup is full, and how would he be able to give him any further knowledge or teach him. And so today we're going to discuss unlearning, the value of unlearning, and perhaps share some insights on how you might be able to do that and apply that practically in your life. So with me I have Mr. Todd Banks.
Hello, sir.
Kevin Moore.
Hello.
And we have Mr. Andrew Corner. He's joining us as well. And so I'd like to begin today by I guess discussing education and the process of our educational system and what we're collecting as we go through that process, and perhaps find a line where the learning no longer serves its purpose. So I'll open the floor if anybody has anything to add.
Well, sure. I found many a times that throughout educational systems, and right now I think that I'm speaking of the traditional education system, the one that's been put in place where you start at kindergarten, grade 1, and you go up the scale. Wherever it is that you stop, whether that's high school, college, university, a lot of people think that when you are done with your schooling, you're done learning. And to quote Mark Twain, he says, don't let your schooling get in the way of your education. And I found that to be the case for many people as well as myself. When I was done what I thought the educational system of learning gave me, I thought that that's all I needed to know. That's all I ever would know. And everything after that was just me putting into action what I had learned. And I found out fairly quickly that that's not the case. And in most times, I actually had to unlearn, to use the theme of today, what I had been taught. Because I found that, obviously when it comes to mathematics or English, those rules always will apply, but many times we're told, this is all you'll ever amount to, or this is what you're best adapted toward, or this is fact and this is truth. And more we seem to find that we're having to rewrite our textbooks because science or new philosophies or just experience has taught us that there's more to it. And so I find that our educational system is not the end of learning.
That's a good point. I think it relates to the fact that as a child there's so many questions, and those questions should continue along the educational process. We should be urged to ask more questions. It should be a series of questions that don't have necessarily an answer or an objective in mind. There shouldn't always be a right answer that ends the series of questions or ends the process of questioning, and yet we're taught from a very young age, we're taught that our education is geared towards an objective of a vocation or a job or a career or what have you, and the whole process then becomes about that objective rather than enjoying the process itself. Rather than truly learning or by asking more questions, and knowledge for me should open up even further questions, more questions than you began with. So, I'd like to take anybody's take on that. I'd like to hear that.
Yeah, like you said, every question should lead to another question. I think that's great. But the education system sets us up for really one goal, and that is to finish schooling in high school or college, university, whatever, and then go out and get a job, vocation, like you said. And then that's when the learning could stop if you didn't really care about it. But that's when the learning should start, I think. Start to discover the world and just all that it has to offer. And it starts by emptying your cup. But you first have to recognize the need. You have to want to learn more. If you don't want to learn more, you're just going to cruise through life with what you've been taught in school. But you have to recognize the need. That's the first step.
I'd agree. I think that it comes down to really recognizing that your cup is full.
Yeah.
Or admitting that your cup is full, and you need to shed some skin. You need to empty that cup. And I think those absolute answers, particularly in education, which ends with degrees on a business card that suggest that that sense of righteousness or overconfidence, that is almost preventative of unlearning, of taking knowledge that no longer serves your immediate purpose or your purpose in life or your purpose in society, and unlearning that knowledge in order to relearn something that does serve a purpose. The more that you learn, the more knowledge you're given and tools that you're given, you're told that you're an authority. And we need to shed that. We need to move beyond that. And I'll reference Jacob Barnett on YouTube, a young man, 12 years old, who was told he had autism when he was 3 or 4 years old, that he'd never read, never learn at a satisfactory rate. And meanwhile, this young man, as of last year, is now at Purdue University and has published a paper challenging Einstein's theory of relativity. He does an awesome presentation on TED Teen Talks. If listeners want to take a moment and look for Jacob Barnett on TED Teen Talks, or look at the johnkanary.com blog, you can find the video there. But Jacob suggests something that I couldn't agree with more, that our learning is essentially, systematically, a process of impressing teachers. It's not necessarily gaining knowledge or skills, it's impressing teachers. And that prevents you from the most important thing, and that's to look at something from your own unique perspective, which is what he suggests is the beginning of creativity, creative thought. So that brings us down to the process of creativity, which I think is far more important than an education, being creative, which for me, it relies entirely on imagination over and above the intellect. So, anybody want to share their thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll just quickly, to be creative, the education system, it's a fail-past, system. And so many kids are afraid to express themselves because they're afraid to step out of the box or go color outside the lines and be creative because they're afraid of failing. And I don't think that's a very good way to have our system set up, but that's the way it is. But kids should be encouraged to step outside that box and try something new, and don't be afraid to fail. Because there is no failing in creativity. Creativity can't be wrong, as far as I'm concerned.
It's funny.
Expression.
I agree. It's funny you turn to that, because it's almost instilled in us to be afraid to fail. You have to pass or fail, or you won't get to the next class.
Since you're 5 years old, 5 years to 22 years, there's that fear of failure. At the most impressionable part of our life, the first 20 years, first 10 years, I was always terrified. In school, I didn't like it, I didn't succeed, didn't do well, because I was afraid of failing. I wasn't afraid of succeeding, I just was terrified of going home and bringing home an F to my parents, or, being afraid of disappointing the teacher.
You get held back, you get told you weren't worth this, you weren't worth that.
Yeah, it's a worth issue too, yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
sorry.
Definitely no. And
Can I throw in a perspective here?
Yeah, let's hear your perspective, Andy.
I don't want to interrupt because I know that there's a bit of lag between the audio between when you guys speak and when I speak, so I just wanted to hold off and let you guys talk. But if it's okay, I like to just give my impression of what schooling was like for me as a child. I suppose nowadays, since I'm going on 40 years old, if you could have identified what would have been wrong with me, or as far as the educational process working for me when I was a child, it might have been said that I would have something like an ADHD, which is what they say to kids nowadays when they're a little bit more hyperactive, or they have trouble paying attention and they can't really focus in class. And what do they do now? They medicate kids so that they can go into this classroom situation and basically have this kind of cut and paste education where what they want is not for you to think creatively, not for you to be able to learn critical thinking. What they want is they want you to be able to take an answer that they tell you is the correct answer and spit it back out at them. And that's how you get a 10 out of 10 score in school. Now, what if you look at questions differently, or you question more, or maybe you're not satisfied with the answer, and you're not getting the kind of feedback that you want from the educational system, as far as being able to question more and go off in other directions that are not limited, that are not inside the limited parameters of what is currently provided in the current educational system. You know, certain kids, when you're talking about creativity, certain kids, that's just the way that their brain thinks. There's nothing wrong with them. They're just more creative, and they want to have the ability to not just talk about what it is that's laid out in front of them. They want to have the ability to ask a question. Well, why is this going to apply to me? Why does this matter in my life? And without getting that kind of feedback, you really fail to understand what the class is for. You fail to engage in the class. At least this is what I feel happened to me. And the education system, you know, I would say the education system failed me. That's not fair. But the education system certainly did not work for someone like me. I mean, I didn't do well in school, but I don't think that there's anything wrong with me. I don't think there's anything intellectually keeping me from succeeding in life, other than the fact that when I went to school, I wasn't able to spit out exactly what they wanted me to say right back to them. And so therefore I didn't receive the certificate, and I didn't move on to academic excellence, or you know, whatever the case may be that you can throw into a resume that you can get the kind of job that you're looking for, whether it be, you know, in advertising or some kind of creative license type environment that I would never be allowed to go into, because I don't have the piece of paper that says this is where I'm able to spit out what you're trying to tell me. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little lost in my own thoughts here.
No,
you guys understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, by all means, Andy, and I couldn't agree more. And that brings me around to exactly what I'm suggesting too, and what I want to explore here as well. That we aren't really taught the most valuable skill that we could have as human beings, and that's critical thinking. And that brings me to George Carlin quote that don't teach your kids how to read, teach your kids to question everything that they read. And you're suggesting that the educational system, all it really is you know, get them in, chew them up, spit them out, and they want the right answer, and that's how you pass, and that's how you succeed, and that's how you fit into the mold, and that's how you get funneled into your particular role in society.
Or how you end up to be successful in the business world, or whatever world it is that people perceive as being important for academic. Just to find a job where you can actually make decent money doing something that you probably wouldn't enjoy anyways.
I agree, and here that brings us to what I'd like to explore. In regards to what you're saying, I'll refer to Mr. Jacob Barnett again. This young man, autism is what they thought he had. They were ready to diagnose him, medicate him, on and on and on. And he actually ended up learning of his own accord, reading textbooks about astrophysics, so on and so forth, until he was admitted to Purdue University at 10 years old, and is now challenging Einstein's theory of relativity. And that's because he thought outside of the current educational system standards. And what that takes for me is not intellect. Intellect is numbers. Intellect is something we all have, and it is valuable. I'm not devaluing intellect. I'm suggesting that an even more important aspect of our mind is our imagination. And for me, transformation, all great discoveries, all began with imagination. And so I'd like the topic's unlearning, and I think in order to unlearn, it's important that you imagine that there are more possibilities. There's something else.
It's definitely important to imagine that what you have currently as your skill set, as your belief set, as how you think, talk, and act on a daily basis, there may be something more. But it's also going back to what we were talking about just a moment ago, the fact that so many times someone like that, Jacob Barnett, or even our friend Andy here, it's what's valued, it's what's pushed and nurtured as far as creativity or as far as intellect goes. Someone like an Andy or someone like a Jacob Barnett, they are different. They are not less, they may be not more. But that difference is all of a sudden stifled. So
precisely, and that's what I liked what Andy had to say, because that's essentially what I see not just in school but in society. That creative critical thinking is not something that's valued from people.
And that is the one big point that I was going to just make there, is the fact that, or try to make, sorry, is the fact that that is another thing that many people need to unlearn. Is it's not just the educational system that has been taught to us, grade 1 to 12 or university and so on. It's the fact that it's the value that we place on the educational system. It's the themes behind the story. It's what you are trying to do as a parent. You're trying to either fit in, you're trying to fit a status quo of how smart your child is or how successful they are, how competitive they can be, whether it's in a spelling bee or a soccer team or what have you. It's the values that once were, I do not think any longer are.
I couldn't agree more. It's so archaic to tell your children to always listen to their teacher, always this and always that, when really what we should be telling our children is to question their teacher. If it doesn't seem to serve a purpose, if they don't understand where it belongs, ask why. And if they don't get an answer that seems to make sense, continue asking why. And if the teacher can't answer that, maybe the teacher's no longer the right person for the job. And maybe the system isn't the right place to be.
I think that's more the answer. The system isn't the place to be, because the teachers have a job to do, and they have to stay, again, within the parameters of the curriculum that they're given. And sure, they have a little bit of leeway to play with it to try to teach the lessons that they have to get done so that the kids can answer the standardized questions at the end of the quarter or whatever they do. But, you can't put that blame on the teachers. The teachers are just doing the job that they've been given to do. They also went through an education system where they were taught to act a certain way, and they were taught to teach a certain way. So it's difficult to get outside of those parameters again. Now, what you need to ask yourself is why are we teaching our children the way that we are? Are we teaching our children to be critical thinkers? Are we teaching our children to question the system? Or are we teaching our children to obey the system, to be, as you said, as George Carlin said, they just want obedient workers, people just smart enough to push the buttons and sign the documents, and that's it. They don't want people capable of critical thought. They don't want people capable of questioning the way that things are. They just want obedient workers. So that's, if you're asking the question is, what do we need to do now in order to see things improve with the education system? You have to start with the way that the business world works, because you have to start with, where's the starting point in that case? I would ask you.
Well, I'm glad you brought all that up, because it brings me back to these points here, and developing imagination, I think, is absolutely critical in society today. Making imagination, our ability to think way outside the box, is what we should be nurturing. And for me, what that begins with is one key thing that started mankind, our progress, with when a Neanderthal hit a piece of flint against a rock, it was out of curiosity. And I feel we can say stifling creativity and all of these abstract notions, but really a curious child, and I'm guilty of it as a parent, a curious child is typically dealt with belligerently in a lot of cases, particularly in a school environment. If you are curious, it's good to a certain extent, but your curiosity has a limit in most environments. It's not accepted to be constantly curious, and I think we have to begin nurturing and fostering that sense of curiosity on a regular basis.
What if we're not prepared to, though? A big thing I talk about is one word, and it's why. You mentioned why. We don't ask why. As kids ask why all the time. You have kids, you know what it's like. Why is the sky blue? Why is the grass green? Most times we either don't know the answer or we don't like the answer, so we don't want to repeat it. Grass, in the sky, that's different, but the scarier questions your kids ask you, it's like, well, I don't want to tell them the truth. But why? We got to ask why, and we ask what, who, where, when, all the time, but we never care about why. And you ask your teacher, why is that? They're not going to tell you, even if they know it, because it's not part of the curriculum.
They have to stay within that standardized protocol. Andrew, yeah.
Or
so it's okay. So that brings me to the fact that perhaps it's our beliefs that we've inherited from teachers, parents, our superiors. Those beliefs we've inherited that we didn't even necessarily decide were our belief system. They were given to us that are limiting our potential as people. Those are things we have to question, and what doesn't fit in to an atmosphere of growth, those things we need to abandon and shed and unlearn in order to relearn things that will contribute to our growth.
Well, let's just say it is, far ago, when thunder and when lightning struck and people heard thunder, they thought that was the gods. They made up gods for all of these natural phenomena that they couldn't explain. Well, we can explain those things now. So those are myths and legends and stories that are no longer useful. And that carries even unto today. What served possibly our parents, but more so our grandparents and our great-grandparents and so on, there were beliefs, ideals, ways of thinking. Racism was not that uncommon even 40 years ago. So there were things that served other people as a safety blanket, so to speak, that no longer serve us. But they may have been ingrained in us over a period of time. And these are things that the process of unlearning is that curiosity, is that questioning, is this serving me anymore?
True, and that's what we're trying to get at, is to unlearn those things that are no longer serving a purpose in growing our lives. I truly believe wholeheartedly that begins with developing your imagination, which begins with curiosity, and then brings me to the next point here, that in order to do so, it's incredibly important to multiply your perspectives. You can't think outside of the box when you're only thinking within a certain perspective, whether it's to entertain, find humor in disappointment, or anthropomorphize an object, or play with the situation to multiply your perspective and see it from a different angle. And that's why I'm glad we have many different angles here. There's the four of us here discussing this particular notion, and to keep us on the task of discussing the value of unlearning. Andrew, what is your take, or how do you find, or what have you done to multiply your perspectives or maintain enough objectivity to be able to see a certain situation from a different angle?
What have I done? Oh, well, to be perfectly honest, lately, over the last couple of years, there was a long time in my life, again, I'm coming up to 40, so probably the better half of that life was spent just being like the average person, where you go to work and you pay your bills and you go out drinking and you hang out with your friends and you do all the things that you shouldn't do, but you do just to get by, because you're not happy with the way things are. You're not happy this is just the way that I feel, so please don't take it the wrong way, but you're not happy with the way things are and you feel like there's something messed up and you're not really sure what it is and you don't know where to go and you don't know who to talk to. But over the last decade or so, you see the emergence of the internet and you see the emergence of all sorts of informational sources that you can really gather information from. I mean, this podcast would be one where people can tune in and listen to, other people's points of view and other people's perspectives and find out where to find that information. So for me, because I've been doing this already for a few years, I read whatever books I can get my hands on, about, you just read about the plethora of information that you can find as far as psychology is concerned, as far as history is concerned, as far as education is concerned. Where do I find my information? I've also watched, I can't even tell you, umpteen amounts of documentaries. To nail it down to a specific source, I would say also that I'm a believer, I'm a follower of the Zeitgeist movement. That's not really anything in particular other than a way of thinking that really I subscribe to, which says that certain things about the way that we live our lives are not really true. There is no altruism in life as it exists now. I think a lot of people believe this. A lot of people see the corruption that's happening in the business world now. They see the corruption that's happening in the banking world associated with that. They see the corruption that's happened in the health system, in the educational system. And you see news stories on the news every single day about what's going on, what's wrong with the world. Well, if you want to find out a lot about that kind of information, there's just innumerable websites out there that have documentary films, that have things that you can watch to learn different perspectives. And it's just an accumulation of all that information that helps you to develop a new world perspective. So as far as where have I learned what I know and what I think about and where do I go for more information, it's just accumulated knowledge from all different sorts. It's out there. It's everywhere. I mean, it's just, what do you want to know? If somebody asks you a question and you don't know the answers are out there. It's not hard to find. You can find an answer on pretty much anything. And all you need to do is find some time during the day that people usually can't find some time and spend some time looking into it, investigating it, and doing the research to find out the answer so that next time that somebody brings it up, you have something intelligent to say about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that lends itself to the note, like we're talking about this step here, multiplying your perspectives, and it lends itself to the notion that I truly believe our consciousness has reached a level now where we have broken out of a synchronous style of learning, where everybody learns at the same pace, in the same room, the way that things have been going for however many decades now. We've reached a point where our consciousness has expanded, the information has become available for us to learn asynchronously of our own accord, in our own direction, at our own pace. And I think it's very important that we recognize that our system, as it stands, maintains that we keep one perspective, when true creative thought demands you have more than one perspective. And we've discussed here that if you start to present that idea in most situations, whether it's a teacher, a boss, whomever, it's usually not readily accepted. So multiplying perspectives is essential to creative thought, which again brings us back to Jacob Barnett's point that unique perspective with multiplying perspectives and leading to creative thought. And that brings me to this point, that it is essential to your imagination, to developing your imagination and your consciousness further, to create something as consistently as possible.
I definitely believe that to be so. And when Andy brought up the fact that he's found many different perspectives through the internet, through books, what have you, the rise of this consciousness that you speak of, and this rise of technology, I think I've maybe mentioned this before somewhere, whether it was in another podcast or in the article that I may have wrote for the JK blog, that with this rise of technology, our collective heads are coming out of the sand. We are becoming aware of the fact that even though we may be an individual, we have a voice that can be heard all around the world. And that says that, hey, maybe I have something of value to say. And I can also learn from the perspectives of others easily, which may allow me to create something new. And so this new inundation of other people creating things and sharing things, and this new wonder, this new information that's coming at you, you feel awestruck and you say, hey, wow, I've been moved by this relatively simple thing that somebody's done across the earth that's allowed me to see a new perspective. Maybe I can create something too. And that right there, that being awestruck, that expansion of imagination, that kind of reintegration with your own creativity, your own mind, saying, hey, wow, there are other ways of thinking. And I wasn't wrong when I was younger, having that wonderful imagination. You can create anything. It gives you that sense of the lifestyle that I have isn't good enough. The beliefs that I have aren't good enough.
That there must be more.
There must be more. There must be a different way.
I like what you're saying, because essentially you're suggesting that through another perspective, just the sense of wonder of how fresh and new and different it is, that gives you that sense of wonder that then ignites a certain creative spark.
Yes, and it gives you a comparison to the circumstances that you now inhabit. And those circumstances, more often than not, aren't serving you. If you've been awestruck by this thing outside of you, more often than not, it's because you're not necessarily doing it yourself. Sometimes you can, let's just say you're a musician and you create a beautiful piece of music, and you can, like anybody else, be moved by another piece of music. But there are many times, if there are avenues of your life that you're not able to see outside of a certain realm or outside of a box that you may have put yourself in, or your parents or your social structures have put you in. All of a sudden, the lid has been blown off by this new thing that you've been introduced to via the internet or via a book, or a new perspective, somebody on a podcast such as Andy talking about biographies. Say, hey, well, maybe I should look at a biography, and it brings you to this new thing. It tells you that, hey, maybe what I'm dealing with right now isn't serving me anymore. And I can actually create something new. Whether it's creating a new belief, or whether it's creating a new piece of art, or a new job, or you can create anything.
I believe previously Kevin actually mentioned that there was, situations that children might face where they feel like what they're able to offer, whether it's creating you had mentioned a stick man, you draw a stick man, and they feel like they just can't, it's not going to be acceptable, right? And I like what you're suggesting, because even in drawing a stick man, as simple as a stick man can be, that is a piece of creative work. And there are artists around the globe, Picasso, Pollock, many different artists who started with such simplistic concepts, but because they had that creative spark and questioned their own inherited beliefs and developed them, the value grew and grew. And I don't mean financial value, I mean the value, the vibrational quality of it, the value of the art, of what the artist saw, of how the artist applied himself. It grew simply because of that. It doesn't matter. You tell yourself you can't. That's one thing we have to unlearn, in my opinion. Anything that is suggesting to you that I can't needs to be abandoned. It has to be. And so I'm going to turn to you here, Andy. We're talking about creating consistently, and I know you just created a new life. You just had a new baby boy. And so I'd like to ask you, in regards to being creative, creating something consistently, what are some practices that you apply for your life?
As far as being creative consistently, again, I find that the educational process is a form of creation. It's a form of creating those thoughts in your mind that allow you to again, interact with your environment, with the people around you, with your family, in a way that, if you're out there searching information on just, the way people think or what other people, just learning about how to acknowledge other people's perspectives and understanding maybe different parts of the world, what people's perspectives are like, so how they perceive life and how they think about certain outcomes. You really want to be able to see the world from other people's perspective if you want to understand the way the world works. If you want to understand why it seems like some people are so crazy, well, take a walk in their shoes, understand what it is that they're dealing with on a daily basis, and maybe they don't seem so crazy to you anymore. If you look at what's happening in Syria, if you look at what just happened in Iraq, if you look at what's happening in Bali, you look at what's happening to these soldiers, there's all different perspectives on the way that it's being told in the media, but you really need to get some backstory and understand why these people think the way they do. And right now, am I applying that in my life? Yeah, I think that when you start to understand the way that other people think about things, you also are able to take that and transfer it into being able to understand the people in your immediate family, in your immediate vicinity, anywhere that you might meet somebody on the street. It really helps you to get perspective when you're talking to them and understand where they're coming from and be able to respond to them in a way that's going to make them feel comfortable. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, right? You just want to be able to live life in a way that is going to bring happiness to you, and bringing happiness to me is bringing happiness to someone else that I meet in the street. It's all reciprocal. It's all about bringing joy to people's lives, and to really understand someone and to have a conversation with someone. Maybe there's something that's getting them down, to be able to understand their point of view depending on where they come from. You can meet people from all over the world. You could go to a bar and just talk to a random stranger and find out about where they're from, and find out about how they think about things, and have a conversation with them, and maybe you can send them away with some piece of insight that they didn't have before they talked to you, or they can tell you something about their part of the world that you didn't understand. And I think it makes for everyone in the world, it makes the world a better place if we all take that initiative to be creative and to learn something about somebody else's perspective, somebody else's point of view, somebody else's life. I think that's very important.
I think that's great. That brings a thought to mind that when we talk about being creative, we're not necessarily talking about art. We're not talking about painting or music necessarily. You had mentioned previously that there's being a life artist, being a thought artist. Like, I like your perspective on this, Andy, that just the notion of having a new, fresh thought and a new, fresh perspective, that in itself is creative. How you hold a conversation with a loved one, a neighbor, a stranger. If you can do that in a new way, that's creative. But so we aren't necessarily discussing painting, music, or art. Art is the I guess the upper echelon of creativity, or the easily recognized level of creativity. When you had mentioned previously, Todd, you had discussed art and that applying yourself to any degree is creativity, and you had discussed living, your lifestyle. Your lifestyle is an art form. It's creative. You're creating your life.
Well, that's just it. You could decide tomorrow, because not everybody has the same accesses. Many people have access to the internet. Many people have access to certain realms of technology, but if you wanted to create a piece of art, and you might be in a war-torn area, or you might be in a place that may not have access to all of the tools that you might need, well, maybe you can't create a tangible form of art. But going back to what Andy was talking about, that was actually very profound. You can create new mental thought structures. You can create connections with people. You can create a smile. And I would say that is more tangible than many pieces of art can be, because they don't all connect with people. But when you try and connect with somebody face to face, that is a true connection. That's a true creation. You made something happen that was not there before.
So then really what it comes down to is recognizing as human beings, practically everything we do, simply because we're alive and conscious, practically everything that we do is creative by nature, by proxy. What we do is we're creating our life as we go. And we only limit ourselves when we say, I can't, I won't, or start to believe in things that we've inherited from others. And I think we really need to open our eyes and recognize the fact that it's in us every moment of the day that we are here to create every moment of the day. That's our life.
Definitely. And just a quick thought, going back to what Andy even mentioned, what I just touched on, the fact of creating new mental thought structures. That's the whole idea behind unlearning, is that you have to now create a new way of thinking, a new way to surpass what was no longer serving you before. And I think that that's a very important thing to do, because too many times, I heard an analogy recently where, if you have a drawer full of socks, it's a simple and silly analogy, but let's just say you have a drawer full of socks, and after a while these socks become worn and tired and they have holes in them, and maybe you've lost a pair or you've lost the right one, and so you're wearing two left socks, so it seems. It's something that may actually give you discomfort, or you might feel uncomfortable with at some point. Well, let's just say you go out and you buy a new pair of socks, or to give the theme a meaning, you take on a new belief system. You take on a new way of thinking. You cannot put your new beliefs, you cannot stuff them into the same structure. You need to make room. You need to actually say, these no longer serve me anymore. They did for a time. I've outgrown them. I've outworn them. There may have legitimately been a purpose for these thought systems or these socks, to give the analogy. But we now need to replace them.
Yeah. And on that note, that brings me around to another point here, that we've discussed curiosity, then multiplying your perspectives, and consistently creating. And then I believe one of the most important things is what we're doing right here and now, and that's associating with other creative people who recognize their natural capacity to create. I think that it's essential, sharing what you have, your concept of creating. You put that out there, and somebody else contributes, and it takes on a life of its own. And that creative element then, with another perspective or another creative individual involved, begins to grow. And essentially that's what we're doing right here and now, is sharing our creative energies and sharing our creative potential, where there's something greater than our independent egos at work here that we're creating.
For sure. A great thing to follow is the law of attraction. Like attracts like. So if you want to attract creativity, then look for it and bring it to you and want it, and then you will be surrounded by it. If you don't want it, there'll be nothing. But I'd like to go back to perspectives and the creativity. We're living in the most explosive moment or time in human history, and it's the explosion of information. And anyone living in a developed country that is fortunate enough to have money has one of these. They have a phone that has internet on it. Every single bit of information we've ever known or processed is available on the internet. It's not necessarily going to be the first link that comes up on Google. You just look at the first 5 or the first 10 and decide for yourself. Get a perspective for yourself based on other people's perspectives. The truth is out there. Whether it's an answer to a question you're looking for, or a perspective, or just opinions. It's all out there. You've got to look for it, though. And I don't think we use...
If I could just throw it in... Sorry, if I could just throw it in. It's not always the perspective, or it's not always the opinion you're looking for either. And you have to be open to that. And you have to say, okay, I want to know about this, and you can't already decide what the answer is going to be before you go out looking for an answer. You have to accept all the information and then make your decisions based on that and come to your conclusions based on that. Sorry, go ahead.
I like to call this WMD, weapon of mass distraction. They're not being used properly. They really are. I mean, you see it every day. There's people walking down the street. They're just not using it to its full potential. And I like to say the truth is out there, but you just got to look for it, and you've got to want to find it.
Well, I agree. You have to have that hunger, which I think most people do have that hunger, whether it's under the surface or not.
It's suppressed, I think.
It's there.
Yeah.
And I think it's something Andy just brought up is so important that that those inherited limiting beliefs, they tend to prevent us from opening our minds to what it is that we have found. When we finally have that spark, that moment where we're willing to take a chance, we're willing to fail, we're willing to risk endangering what we believe to be true, and we look for an answer, or look for a question, for lack of a better way of looking at it. We shouldn't be looking for answers so much as questions, but when we find something that challenges our conditioned belief systems, we stop looking. But we have to be willing to continue searching and accept the possibility that our current system of beliefs might be wrong.
Well, we're curious by nature. We are. We're creatures of impulse, and we're curious. That's how we've evolved. Curiosity. You talk about the flint and the whatever, creating fire. I mean, so the education system kind of suppresses that. I don't know anybody that's really curious. I don't know anybody that just, what's this, what's that, except for my nephews. They're all around the age of 10, and they just ask all sorts of questions that, my brother has a hard time answering. He's a teacher. By going back to, why is the sky blue? I mean, there's an answer for that. And it's out there. You just got to go looking for it and please those impulses. Satisfy those impulses, those creative, going back to creativity. And I think going back to creativity, it really comes from inspiration. I think you're inspired by something that you might find on the internet or hear from somebody else.
Which is why it's so important to surround yourself with creative people.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's beauty around us everywhere, and we could learn to appreciate it, but we learn to do that through inspirational moments where we surround ourselves with creative people. Put a corner on the market on creative people in your life. If somebody has creative thoughts, creative notions, creative habits, put a corner on that market and bring them closer in your life for inspiration, for purpose, to help evolve yourself. And should you feel fear over their creative potential, realize that law of attraction, that law of reciprocity that we've been discussing, inevitably, you're bringing something into your life that's going to increase your level of creativity, your imagination, your conscious mind.
It will inspire you.
Right.
Someone else's creativity.
Yeah, go right ahead, Andy.
I just wanted to say that also you'll find that when you start finding that inspiration to learn about something and you take the time, and instead of doing what you were going to do, instead of watching that television show or watching the hockey game, you start looking into a piece of information. Say you want to know about World War II, or where did Hitler get his money from that supported the war machine in Germany? You start looking into that stuff, and you'll find that there's always ways that you can branch off into other avenues that are related to that piece of information. And you'll find that the more that you learn, the more you want to learn. It's just like anything else. With practice, you just get better and better at doing it. And it also inspires the mind. So the more you think, the more you want to think. The more that you learn, the more you want to learn. It's not just inspiration. It's changing your entire perspective about the way that you live your life. And it's important that people do that, because it's important that people realize that without you getting out there and interacting with people and interacting with the world around you and learning about the things that are happening with the world around you and getting involved in that, like you see today, what was it, yesterday, the march against Monsanto, you see all kinds of people getting out there and actually talking about it. And just by being out in those crowds, walking down the streets and talking to other people and picking up bits and pieces of information about Monsanto that you didn't know before, that increases your will to want to go do that again, especially if you have a really good experience from that. And you'll just want to go out there and you'll want to be a part of the world as opposed to being a part of the imaginary world that you find in your television set. And that's so important. Get unplugged and get plugged into the real world. And you'll find that a lot. Just doing that, just talking to people around you that are, like you guys say, talking to somebody that you've surrounding yourself with creative people and people that think that way, you're just going to find a lot more joy out of life. There's just so much more to appreciate out of having conversations that are about something real as opposed to just what happened last night on some silly television show that I'm never going to watch. I'm sorry, but I'm done with that kind of stuff. I don't find that in my life anymore. And all I want to do is talk to people about what's happening in the world. And nothing makes me happier than finding somebody that actually has something to give back to me, because it improves my ability to understand the world around me. And that's what it's all about.
That's true, and I think what you illustrated there as well is that through this creative process, when you ask a question and search for an answer, in that search for an answer, what inevitably should happen to an open, creative mind is more questions, more avenues, more creative avenues. I'll use the Hitler example. That if you were to say, where did Hitler get all the money to fund the war machine? And you do your research, all of a sudden this entire new world of questions and avenues unfolds. And that brings me to this point here. You're never too old to play. You're never too old to be a child. This time we have on earth is really, truly the blink of an eye. It's over in a heartbeat, and we're born, and we should remain in that state of wonder, that childlike state of wonder. And you're never too old to play. And to refer back to that analogy of asking about where Hitler got the money for the war machine, when those questions unfold, that sense of wonder, play with that. Play with the ideas you're given. Play with the discussions you're having. Don't be afraid to get on your hands and knees. Like, that's why I'm so happy for Andy here, who just had a beautiful baby boy, and he's the type of guy who's not afraid to get on his hands and knees and play. Not allow his overconfidence or pride or opulence or any of those things stand in the way of being what's truly human, which is, in my mind, essentially enjoying your life and playing.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think that's one of the most profound points of this unlearning process, is because I heard once a wonderful quote. I do not know who it's by. It says, maturity is defined as the spontaneous ability to be playful. And because you see that so many times with, really nice, fun, older people, is that they're jokesters, they like to play pranks, and they're silly, and everything is lighthearted. They like to have fun. You can see them playing with their grandkids or what have you. And yet, they're mature. You would almost respect what they have to say over, kind of a rigid, stern grandfather, grandmother, what have you. But I think that's one of the biggest things, going back to saying that's a profound point, to be playful. Because when you're playful, you surrender. You surrender to all of the constructs that you were once told by other people. Oh no, don't do that, don't touch that, don't believe that, this is what you should believe, or this is how it's done. When you play, you have to be flexible. You have to just go with the motions. And to me, that's one of the biggest points of unlearning, is the fact that you need to be flexible. You need to adapt. You need to just say, oh, whatever, let's try this instead, because that wasn't working, and let's have fun with this the entire time. And that breeds creativity. That breeds friendships through creativity. That breeds new ways of thought. Because people get comfortable in their discomfort. And that's one of the biggest problems when it comes to changing an idea or a belief. There's that discomfort that people run up against when they want to change. Because as discomfortable, that's not a word, as uncomfortable as it is, people don't want the discomfort of changing through that, because it would almost mean more discomfort than the uncomfortable life they're already living. In order to do that, I think being playful and saying what if is a wonderful tool to start the unlearning process.
I like that you mentioned older people being more playful. I think it comes from the fact that they're really not saddled with the burdens of society. They really aren't, and 15-year-olds aren't either. So young kids, up to the point where you get your first job, you don't have time to do anything but play except for when you're in school. And then older people, they don't have jobs anymore, they have Social Security taking care of them. They have time to be playful as well. But it's that middle part of your life, 15 to 65, that's a large part of your life. You don't have time to be playful. You've got too many concerns, too many things to do, too many bills to pay or whatever, and we need to get away from that. We need to break the chains of society, or whatever you want to call it, and break free and have fun, like what we're trying to say. But unfortunately, so many things, so many responsibilities get in the way. Financial being the biggest, and Andy, you were talking about that. I'm on the same page with you about the zeitgeist stuff. We need to start breaking that away and enjoying the most important part of our lives. 1 to 15, you don't know much, you're learning all sorts of stuff. And then you 15 to 65, that huge chunk, we're strapped to a desk, wasting our time away, doing nothing but pushing the agenda of making money and satisfying whatever it is we need to, the powers that be, I like to call it, the powers that be. Screw all that and just start living life. That's what I say.
I think what you're getting at too is one thing that I think is essential that we all need to unlearn. We need to unlearn the status quo that's keeping us in place, and that's preventing us from being playful. That's preventing us from our creative potential. That's keeping us from being curious every step of the way and embracing that childlike sense of wonder that should be universal in our society. That is coupled with gratitude, and to abandon that status quo is a huge suggestion. That's something that I know many of us would like to see, but that is a gigantic thing to ask of anybody. But I will be quite frank and suggest that is essential right now for our society, for our level of consciousness to evolve to the next level.
Definitely, and I very much so believe that. But I think it's going back to one of the previous points of connecting with creative people, is that you could create your own status quo with your own creative people. And it doesn't have to be the same construct that we're talking about of, the stock market and the economy and this and that and the rise of the market, this and that. It could just be, I'm going to get together with this person and we're going to create something, and then we're going to bring in these people, just like this podcast. We're bringing in Andy today, and who knows what'll happen next week. But the status quo could be something brand new. It could be your own creation, like we were talking about before. You could be a life creationist. You could be a day creationist. You could create your own day. You can, for tomorrow, make up the status quo that you want. Play with the people that you want to play with. The next day, go back to what you were doing before. But I guarantee you would have more fun.
I guarantee you that new status quo would be something you'd want to live and build on. That's profound. I like that you shared that it's not even about unlearning. To return to the Toffler quote that we began this with, it's not even just about unlearning the current status quo. You learned the status quo, unlearn that current status quo, and relearn a status quo of your own creation that suits your purpose, and in a mutually beneficial way with those other creative people you're sharing your time with. What are your thoughts on that before we part ways, Andy?
Absolutely, unlearning the status quo is very important as far as finding your true self. I think a lot of people are out there trying to be what other people want them to be, and that also stifles creativity when you're not trying to Maybe you're just afraid to say the wrong thing or whatever the case may be that might hold you back from maybe talking to maybe you see somebody that you would like to speak to, or maybe you don't ask that girl on a date because you're afraid of embarrassing yourself. You need to realize that you only get one life, and you need to break free of all those illusions that there's something to lose. There's nothing to lose by putting yourself out there, by trying to unlearn what you have learned as far as fitting in and just being part of the status quo. And that really is that's a huge problem for people. They just want to fit in. They want to be part of the status quo. And I wouldn't, where you say maybe make a new status quo, I wouldn't say make a new status quo, because that just means you don't want a status quo. You want free, creative, beautiful human beings out there interacting with one another without the fear of being made fun of. And for that to happen, you need people also to be reciprocal about that, and they need to realize that you're not going to chastise them, you're not going to make fun of them, you're not going to pick on them when they put themselves out there. And that's a whole new way of thinking that people need to really wrap their heads around. You need to just be open and kind, and you will find good things happen from that point.
Definitely. I think the fact that, unlearning is the education in and of itself. So you don't need to unlearn the status quo to learn a new one. And when I was mentioning about the status quo, it's for your own peace of mind. It's not to create a new clique or create a new, way of living that everybody else isn't good enough if they're not doing so. That's not the intention I had with that. It was more so just find something that serves you, that allows you to be a little bit more creative. Create your own mental constructs that will serve you for a time, and then you can live beyond after that.
I think we don't want to get trapped in the term status quo, because I understand what you're both talking about. So what we're really talking about is standards, personal standards, and the status quo is something that's is essentially what's expected of you by the rest of society, and I think we really do have to escape that. And what I think what Todd's suggesting is create your own standard. Don't necessarily live up to other people's standards. And Andy, you were suggesting that too, is a lot of people are living their lives trying to be something they were told they should be. And that is the essence of what I see a lot of our educational system seems to be about. So to bring this all back around here, I think we've discussed the value of unlearning. I think we've discussed the invaluable resource that we have in an imagination, and another invaluable resource that we have in our hands here, which is technology and the explosion of information through the internet. Our life experience is a toolbox that we can use to adapt to new situations, new job, new role, and any new environmental change or any new change in our circumstances or our life should consistently make you question whether the tool that you know and rely on is still the right tool for the job. And I think that's essentially what we've discussed here successfully. If it's not the right tool for the job, go ahead and make a new one. So,
Definitely.
I'd like to tie all this up by thanking you guys for being a part of this evening.
Pleasure.
That was good.
And Andy, we will do this again in the near future.
Thanks for having me.
All right, my friend. We'll talk soon.
This has been another episode of the Accelerated Performance Experiment. Please visit www.johnkanary.com for more information. Subscribe to our Seeds of Excellence newsletter on the right-hand sidebar for a free download of John's Sales Mastery audio program. Thanks for tuning in.